Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the order for the
Senator from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I appreciate being given the time to make a few remarks this afternoon as a new senator from Ohio. To be in the Senate is a great honor, and it's also a solemn responsibility, particularly given the critical issues we have before us. It's actually not an honor I expected to have. After 12 years in the U.S. House, representing Southern Ohio and serving in the Bush administration, I returned home to Cincinnati about 4 years ago. Although we'd kept our home there and raised our kids there, I'd commuted for 15 years. And it was time to be home with 3 teenagers, my amazing wife, Jane, and other family members, including my dad, and one of my true heroes. At that time, my predecessor, Senator George Voinovich, was serving with distinction here and had said that he intended to run for re-election. I was happy to be back in the private sector, involved in 2 small family businesses, practicing law, teaching at the Ohio State University, and enjoying being a dad, including getting to coach my daughter's soccer teams. But I was also watching with apprehension the worsening economy and the way the administration and Congress were responding to it. When George Voinovich announced he would not seek re-election to the Senate, I made the decision to run because I was so concerned about the direction of my state and our country. I saw the bottom falling out of the Ohio economy. I saw firsthand the pain that comes with layoffs and downsizing. Like others, I was frustrated that while Ohio small businesses and families were making tough decisions to deal with a deepening recession, the federal government seemed immune, out of touch. Instead of cutting expenses and figuring out how to do more with less and focusing on private sector job growth, the Obama administration and Congress responded with a big government approach. Unfortunately, the $800 billion stimulus package had less to do with creating private sector jobs than growing the size and the scope of government. And in the midst of all this, I saw a new national health care bill working its way through the system that would substantially increase the federal government role and lock in place the unsustainable costs and inefficiencies in our current health care system, making health care even more expensive for families and small businesses and making it harder to deal with the exploding costs of health care in our federal budget. And I saw record deficits building up to dangerous levels of debt that further threatened our economy. These issues, these deep concerns over jobs and the direction of our economy and the fiscal crisis we face as a nation are my focus now in the United States Senate. And I'm not alone. Whether Republican, Democrat, or independent, I believe Ohioans understand that our state and our country are in trouble. And it's going to take real change, and all of us working together across party lines to set things right. I believe the twin challenges of our time are to revive the American economic miracle and to stop the reckless overspending by government that threatens to extinguish the American dream. And one affects the other. Without a growing economy and more jobs, we cannot hope to reverse the dangerous trend of record deficits and deepening debt. And without getting our spending under control, we can't get our economy moving. It's not one or the other. In fact, these 2 goals are not inconsistent, they are reinforcing. With the fiscal time bomb on our doorstep and all the uncertainty it creates, we will never see the kind of strong recovery we hope for. So we have to do both. In addition to taking steps to get our fiscal house in order, we revived the American economic miracle by moving aggressively to create the climate for job growth, for innovation, invention, entrepreneurship. We need an environment that encourages risk-taking and private investment, which economists will tell you is the biggest challenge we face in this weak recovery. The current economic climate encouraged by Washington is one of uncertainty and one of apprehension. I've seen it all over Ohio. Last fall, I visited an independent trucking company, Worcester Trucking, in Wayne County, Ohio. Paul Williams, the owner, pulled together a dozen or so local businesses from the area for a roundtable discussion, one of many I've had in the last couple of years. Struggling in a tough economy, these small businesses all wondered the same thing. Why has Washington made it harder on them to grow and create jobs, not easier? They talked about the threat of new EPA regulations that will drive up energy costs. Depending on their business, they were worried about other specific federal regulations or mandates on trucking, on manufacturing, and banking that would drive up their compliance costs and make them less competitive. They talked about the threat of higher taxes coming, increasing the uncertainty at a time when the opposite is needed, to incentivize businesses to invest and to grow. Like the vast majority of small businesses, most of these businesses around the table that day pay their taxes as individuals not as corporations. The temporary extension of tax rates on capital gains, income tax, death taxes, and the very real possibility of higher taxes soon reduces their incentive to invest and create the jobs we need. Every single small business owner around the table talked about health care. All of them said the same thing. They said since the health care bill has passed, their health care costs are going up more, not less. They were already going up. Now they say they're going up faster. And that increases their cost of doing business, making it harder for them to create jobs. They talked about premium increases of 10 to 25%, annual premium increases, eating away, of course, at their profits and any chance to expand, even after they've taken steps to cut expenses. At one of the 80 factory visits I've made in the past 2 years, Bruce Beagley, an impressive small business entrepreneur in Northeast Ohio, told me his orders are up, business is picking up, but he wasn't hiring. He was paying overtime instead because he wasn't willing to hire permanent workers because of the embedded costs of health care. And our education system and federal worker retraining system is also failing us in Ohio. Around the state, high-tech companies have told me they can't find the skilled workers they need. This is wrong. At a time of soaring unemployment, there's a skills gap in America. There are high-skilled, high-wage jobs available, but our schools aren't producing a sufficient supply of well-trained American workers. You can't be out there talking to workers in management without seeing these issues. But I've also seen it closer to home. In fact, I'm the product of a small family business. My dad, Bill Portman, who we lost at age 88 last year, was one of those small business risk takers. He took a big risk, in fact, when I was a kid. At age 40, he left his job. He had a good job with a big company as a salesman. He had health care, and he had some retirement benefits. He gave it all up to start his own business, Portman Equipment Company. Started with 5 people. My mom was the bookkeeper. He couldn't get a loan because his family didn't have any money, and the bank wouldn't lend him any money, so he borrowed money from my mom's uncle to get things started. The company lost money the first few years, but he kept it alive through hard work, ingenuity, and sacrifice. My brother took the reins later and took the company to a new level, but by the time my dad retired, the company employed almost 300 people, 300 families. We all worked there, and when I was growing up, the discussion around the kitchen table was often about how government affects small business, how it affected him, rules, regulations, taxes. My dad is among my heroes because of his hard work and his sacrifice, but because they built something of value. I've seen it done. I know the role government can play and should not play in helping create jobs and opportunities. About a year ago, I asked my dad if he would take the same risk today. He thought about it for a while, kind of shook his head and said, I don't know. There's just so much uncertainty out there. That's a word I hear a lot from small business owners all over Ohio. That's the reason a lot of job creators or potential job creators are staying on the sidelines, keeping their cash on the sidelines, rather than investing in plant, equipment, and people. Leadership is needed to create a positive climate which spurs job growth, drives opportunity, and restores the American dream. Leadership is needed to get a handle on our serious fiscal issues. Instead, we're debating at the margins. You'll see it play out on the floor of the Senate this week. We're locked in a fierce partisan battle about less than 1% of federal outlays, actual federal spending in this fiscal year. And we aren't even addressing the biggest and fastest growing part of our budget, which is the important but unsustainable entitlement programs. In fact, as American families have tightened their belts over the past couple of years and businesses have had to do more with less, the federal government has taken the opposite path, spending more, growing bigger, and becoming more involved in our private economy and our lives. Over the past 2 years, Paul Williams at that trucking company in Worcester I talked about had to cut expenses to stay afloat. In fact, they had to sell a couple of their trucks and let people go. Here in Washington, during that same time, the U.S. government, through going deeper into debt, borrowing more money, brought on more government employees, and grew in size. During that same 2 years, Washington spent 27% more in the so-called domestic discretionary spending that's being debated on the floor this week. Doesn't count the stimulus bill and other one-time spending. I'm told that gives us a staggering 80% increase in this type of spending over the past couple of years. This historic failure to control spending directly affects all of us because it affects our economy and our ability to create jobs. It pushes up interest rates, affecting car loans, mortgages, student loans. It crowds out private investment, and it leaves us with three bad choices: far higher taxes, even more borrowing, or both. This will surprise no one, but recently a group of 47 respected business economists agreed to this, that the single biggest threat to our economy was our debt and deficits. Restoring fiscal constraint is critical to creating the certainty that employers and entrepreneurs need to create jobs across Ohio and across our country. It's truly dangerous because left unchecked, these mounting debts are likely to lead to the kind of debt crisis we've seen in other countries, like Greece. The government spending more than it takes in hurts our economy today and mortgages the future for our kids and grandkids. Think about this. Every child born in America today, automatically, through no fault of their own, inherits $45,000 in U.S. debt. People are looking for a better way. People are looking for leadership from Washington that takes on those challenges that Ohio's businesses and workers are facing every day. The status quo isn't working. There's an urgency about this that the American people get, even while many in Washington seem to be in denial. We need to rise to that challenge and work together across party lines to meet our economic and fiscal problems head on by aggressively putting in place pro-growth measures and spending restraint. And we've got to do it now. We've got to think and act differently to compete and win in the global economy, regain America's place in the world, and give working families the hope of a better tomorrow. We can no longer rest on our laurels, no longer afford the luxury of living with a substandard education system that doesn't produce young people with the 21st century skills they need to succeed. We can't afford a bureaucratic regulatory regime and a hopelessly complicated tax code that favors social engineering over sound business decisions. We can no longer sit back while our dependence on foreign oil charts our destiny, rather than American innovation and technology. We can't compete and win if our healthcare system is so inefficient that its costs are double the rest of the developed world, while outcomes are unsatisfactory, particularly for those millions of American families without coverage. This is wrong for the small businesses at the round table I talked about earlier, who are trying to provide healthcare and yet stay afloat. And it's wrong for working families whose rising costs are eating away at their opportunity to move up the ladder. To revive the American economic miracle, we need to revolutionize the way we think about all the major institutions of our economy. We need structural reform of our regulatory system, of our tax system, of our energy policy, worker retraining and education, healthcare delivery, our trade policy, and our legal system. And of course, we must fix our broken budgeting system that has us so deeply in debt. These challenges are not insurmountable. I know that because we're Americans, and we've done this before. We waged a world war that required more resources and sacrifice than anything we face today, and we came out stronger. We survived a civil war, a Great Depression, and a Cold War to emerge as the beacon of hope and opportunity for the rest of the world. There's a long line of distinguished senators from Ohio who were part of these historic times, including Warren G. Harding and William Henry Harrison. One famous predecessor is John Glenn, an American hero who, along with his wife Annie, I've been honored to know and work with over the years. And I immediately follow Senator George Voinovich, one of the very finest public servants our state has ever known. Jane and I are grateful to George and Janet for their support and their friendship and for the extraordinary legacy that they leave. There's another former Ohio senator whose desk I requested and speak from today, Robert A. Taft, a fellow Cincinnatian who actually worked at the same law firm where I was a partner before being elected to Congress. Like me, he also served in the House of Representatives and the executive branch. Unlike me, he was first in his high school, college, and law school class, and was said to have had the, quote, best mind in Washington, end quote. Democrats joke that he had the best mind in Washington until he made it up. He was a principled and effective Republican leader. In fact, when his peers commissioned a review of the top 5 U.S. senators in the history of this place, he was selected to be among them. That's why he is one of only 5 senators to have a portrait hanging in the President's room right here off the Senate floor. He was a featured profile in courage in John Kennedy's book. And on his memorial across Constitution Avenue, it is written that it, quote, stands as a tribute to the honesty, indomitable courage, and high principles of free governments, symbolized by his life. You know, it's always dangerous to predict how a former senator would react to today's predicaments. But I'm confident that were Robert A. Taft among us today, he would rise in full-throated support of addressing the twin challenges we've talked about today. His honesty would force him to admit that our economic systems are not up to the global competition of the 21st century. His courage would force him to insist that we address our budget woes, including entitlements. And his love of liberty would compel him to fight for solutions to our economic challenges that promote free markets and the power and dignity of the individual over the heavy hand of government. I will rely on my faith, my family, and the good people of Ohio in my work here in this Senate. As we've discussed, there's a lot of hard work to do. In my role, I hope to be worthy of this great and temporary privilege. I'll work constructively with my colleagues to achieve results, including working with the senior senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown, and others across the aisle. I'll work every day to try to earn the confidence and trust the people of Ohio have placed in me. As we go forward together, may God bless Ohio and this great nation and help guide us in our shared commitment to a better future. Thank you for listening. Mr. President, I yield the floor and note the absence of quorum.